Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. Now before we begin, let's pour one out for our fallen video, massacred by the ancient fairy band, UA Stromberg. You were too good for this world. That's probably enough time mourning. Well, there is a new ban list out, and if you want my thoughts, feel free to check out my previous video. If you're looking for bad, unrefined Day 1 deck lists, however, boy howdy did you ever come to the right place. One thing I alluded to in my video was that reports of True Draco's death were largely exaggerated, and I consider myself a pretty good amateur necromancer. So with that, I present to you, Post-Nerf TD. So here's the list, and there's a lot to talk about. As always, I'll give you a little bit of background about the archetype, a little bit of a discussion about what I hope the deck can do, and as always, the card by card. So firstly, for those of you that don't know, True Draco is a deck that's had its fair share of growing pains. During Zodiac format, it was the winningest non-Zoo deck, which unfortunately means very little. Afterwards, it slowly transitioned from a deck that ground out opponents by drawing several dozen cards in one turn, to a deck that turbos out Masterpiece and sits on him for as long as possible. As of yesterday, that is no longer going to cut it. Having said that, the Masterpiece ban is a bit of a blessing in disguise. Ask anyone who played TD competitively during Zoo format and they'll tell you, Masterpiece sucks. I mean, this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but no matter how fun he was to jam into Weatheries and every other archetype under the sun with continuous spells or traps, he was bricky, he was not terribly difficult to out, and routinely, going into him was a big fat minus. True Draco has gotten back, as a result of this list, one of their actually good monsters, Dynamite Knight, the True Draco fighter, as well as Ignis back to 3. Now, the only thing this deck is missing anymore is a win condition, and what do you know, there have been set releases since the time of Zodiac. There's also old standards that are now creeping into main deck play. It turns out 2700 attack monsters are actually quite powerful when your opponent's monsters have no effects. So we're maxing out on Skill Drain Light, the Monarch's Erupt, and sugar-free Skill Drain, amano-iwato, to ensure our opponents won't be able to out our big honkin' dudes. This allows us to play the Demise Shell we know and love, albeit updated, for both a control format and with new releases. We're playing as many draw spells as possible now that Droll and Lockbirds have been disappearing from our 9-piece hand trap lineups for Impermanence, and we're flexing a little bit of Impermanence of our own. It's the only hand trap that doesn't suck with Demise. Hopefully this list will remind people why Dynamite Knight is not okay. So with that, let's get into the card by card. We're playing 3 copies of amano-iwato, an incredibly powerful threat which both prevents our opponents from hand-trapping our plays and prevents their monsters from interacting with our board states. Next are our Dracos, 1 copy of Dynamite Knight, 3 copies of Ignis, and 1 copy of Maiden. Maiden is atrocious, and I will not hear out the heretics asking me to play more, especially with so few targets in the deck. After that are the True Draco spells, 3 True Draco Heritage and 3 Disciples, followed by 3 Dragonic Diagram, 3 Terraforming, and our draw spells, 3 Card of Demise, 2 Pot of Desires, and 2 Pot of Duality. I truthfully shaved one of each of these because I ran out of main deck space. There was a time when people wanted to play 42 cards in True Draco, but I was never one of those madmen. Finally, we have a fun of the Monarch Stormforth. For traps, we've got True King's Return, a card that has gotten a lot better with Dynamite Knight making his triumphant return to the format, 3 copies of True Draco Apocalypse, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence doing its best impression of Effect Veiler, 3 copies of the Monarch's Erupt doing its best impression of Skill Drain, 1 Skill Drain Prime, and 1 Imperial Order. It still wins the game, and Brandish is right around the corner. The extra deck is artificially empty for our good pal Erupt, so there's nothing more to say. With that, let's jump into the games. So because this deck was already proven in a previous format, we're starting a little further up on the totem pole than we usually do. Our first match is up against Burning Abyss, and they're going first, which is not ideal, but we have an amano-iwato in our opener, which is. This should easily dispatch with the pesky grave effects that make Burning Abyss such a chore to deal with. Our opponent's going to start by firing off a copy of Pot of Desires, then activating the hand effects of Skarm and Libic. That's going to make them a Cherubini on their side of the board, after which they'll normal summon a Crane, getting back that Libic, overlaying into Dante, milling 3 inconsequential cards, specialing a Farfa, using the field effect of Cherubini to send a Seer to graveyard, getting a Skarm back to their side of the field, making a second Dante, and milling 3 more. Now this is a pretty formidable board until we fetch Dragonic Diagram and normal summon a copy of amano-iwato. We're going to use Diagram to destroy our True King's Return and start chewing through that board. Of course, they don't float any longer, after which we'll use a Terraforming to get a second copy of Dragonic Diagram and start chewing through these monsters with monsters of our own. I go for Dynamite Knight and start attacking. We get over the Cherubini for 2300 and 1400 before passing it back to our opponent and returning the Amano to our hand. Unfortunately, while we have a Skill Drain set, it is much worse against Burning Abyss than Amano is. They're going to special summon a Barbar and an Alec from hand, then go into another copy of Cherubini. Once they activate the effect, we'll Skill Drain it in response. They'll activate the Grave effect of Farfa, which they milled off of Cherubini, and then get in for 1700 off this Barbar and 500 from the Cherubini itself. But from here on out, the game's effectively over. We have a copy of Dynamite Knight on our side of the board. We have Dragonic Diagram live, and after normal summoning Amano-iwato, they'll concede. So for game 2, we're playing against Infernoid Lair, and this game really demonstrates that even if we don't have access to Masterpiece, we can still do classic true Draco things, like putting out huge amounts of damage early. Our opponent's going to start by activating the effect of Arima in their hand, getting a Lair to it. Afterwards, they'll activate the effect of Reasoning. We pick one, fearing Decatron, and what do they find but another Arima. They'll activate its effect to draw a card, and what do they draw but Psyframe Driver? Serves you right. Then they normal summon a Decatron, send themselves an Anonku to graveyard, we normal summon an Amano-iwato, turning it off, then go off with Pot of Desires. We're going to tribute summon for an Ignis Heat, then draw a card off Heritage, which turns out to be Majesty Maiden. We'll tribute for her as well, get in for 1800, 2400, and 1900 points of damage. I'm happy to do as much as I want, because in main phase 2, I'm firing off this card of Demise, which finds a copy of Terraforming, so we can destroy this set card of Demise for an Apocalypse, then send the Heritage to the graveyard in the end step at resolution of Card of Demise, so we can activate the set copy of True Draco Phoenix. Our opponent goes for the Anonku play, destroying all monsters on our side of the board. That's great news for us because we can beat this quite easily, especially with the Apocalypse set. They're going to activate Lair, of course, and then on our turn, we're going to flip up this copy of True Draco Apocalypse, then activate the effect of Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix, drawing ourselves a card before destroying it with Apocalypse, returning that Anonku's attack to 1500, destroying their Lair, and then tribute summoning out a Dynamite Knight. We're going to get in for 1300 and lethal. Alright, so it's time for game 3, and you know what that means, a best of 3 versus meta. Whew. Well, we all knew this day was coming. This marks a turning point in 10-minute testing. The deck my opponent is playing, Sky Striker, is poised to consume the meta once it's released, and it's probably best that we face that fact sooner rather than later. Our hand sucks, so our first attempt is unlikely to be particularly good. We're going to start by firing off this duality, and what do we find but, I guess, a diagram. It sucks to go minus this early. We're going to normal summon this copy of amano-iwato so we don't get hand trapped. Then we'll tribute summon over our trap card and draw into another copy. We have an Ignis Heat, which is hopefully enough. Our opponent's going to start by activating this copy of Dragon Shrine. That Ignis Heat is going to get us a Draco Phoenix. They send a Diabolos. Then they'll activate the effect of Afterburner and Aerospace Zero. They're kind of off to the races, but they actually whiff on this Air Zero, which is great news until I see the Twin Twisters that destroys the Air Zero so it can get its Grave effect and get Ray and our Dragonic Diagram so we can no longer plus. They'll then go into Kagari. You've probably seen this play before, alongside this copy of Diabolos. We'll go ahead and have its attack because I don't want to die right now, please. We'll destroy that set card as well, but we probably can't come back from this, especially when they Yada lock us. They're going to go ahead and activate the copy of Shizuru at end step to get a startup engaged to their hand. We'll normal summon an Amano, and unfortunately it has 1500 attack, so we're going to have to use the effect on board of True Draco Apocalypse just so we can get over the Shizuru. Our opponent has a startup engage in hand, so this game is effectively over. They're going to start by activating the copy of Rhoda that they rip off the top for a Ray. They'll then activate startup engage to get a jamming wave to destroy our set card, normal summon Ray, attack, and we'll concede. Alright, so time for game 2, and we've drawn considerably better than game 1. 2 copies of Card of Demise is not ideal, but it's much better than not drawing any draw spells at all. We have an Imperial Order in our hand as well, which should be pretty critical in this matchup. We're going to set 4 fire off the Card of Demise, one of which is a Terraforming, so we'll Dragonic Diagram, which unfortunately immediately gets Ghost Ogred, and then try and draw into a second one off this Pot of Desires. We fail to do so and have to send a Pot of Desires and a True King's Return to graveyard. We're going to flip up this copy of Imperial Order in draw step, and oh my god, they had the Twin Twisters. They're then going to Jamming Wave, hitting our other Card of Demise, setting an Impermeance and passing it back. Now that's not ideal, but thankfully their hand sucks, so we're going to go ahead and normal summon an Ignis that we rip off the top of our deck, get in for 2400 and pass it back to our opponent. They draw a Rhoda, just top deck into top deck into top deck. We're going to use the effect of Ignis to get a Draco Phoenix to our hand. They're going to get a Ray to theirs, then use her effect to get a Kagari to their side of the board. That's going to add the Jamming Wave back to their hand. We chain Impermeance, they chain Eagle Booster, so they do in fact get it. Then they're going to go into a Shizuku, and at end step they're going to get a Startup Engage to their hand. Now we can still attack over the Shizuku at this point in time. We'll use the effect of Draco Phoenix to return 3 cards to the top of our deck, and we rip like a madman as well this copy of Ignis. We draw into a Monarch's Erupt, which is pretty good given the grand scheme of things we could draw into. We'll flip it in draw step after doing a fair amount of damage to our opponent's life points. Unfortunately, it is not long for this world. They're going to use Startup Engage in order to get a copy of Afterburner. We're going to use the effect of Ignis to get a Draco Phoenix. They'll fire off the Afterburner, destroying our Ignis and our Monarch's Erupt. We're going to get a Heritage off of that, but unfortunately, it's not particularly great. They're going to set a Solemn Warning, destroy it with Jamming Wave, then use the bonus effect to destroy our Ignis. We draw into another monster, which means that we can put them down to 700 points of life, but unfortunately, that may not be enough. We're going to use this duality to find no monsters, so we'll have to be satisfied with return with no monsters in graveyard. We'll get in for 1900 and pass it back to our opponent. They draw, and it's dead, but it's also a monster, so they're going to set it. We draw, and it's even more dead, so we're going to have to normal summon Amano-Iwato, attack over this 1800 defense point monster. Feels good after a lifetime of playing Trickstars. They draw into a Widow Anchor. Once again, not an out, but does act as a pretty good fog. We're going to get in for another 0 points of damage, and then they'll pass it back to us, and of course our Amano stays on the field because its effects are negated. They draw into a Foolish Burial Goods they're going to use to send a Metal Foes Fusion, and draw into a Hornet Pit! Hornet Pit, the best card remaining in the deck. The Shizuku now powers down my monsters by like 2,000 attack points. They're going to get the startup engage back to their hand with Kagari to get Widow Anchor and draw another copy of Foolish Burial Goods, and I can't believe we are actually going to lose this game. We have a skill drain set, which is something at the very least. They're going to once again send that copy of Metal Foes Fusion to graveyard to draw a card. Then go into Shizuku. I skill drain, so maybe if we draw something beefy, we can attack over it, and oh my god, it's terraforming. We're going to fire that sucker off for a Dragonic Diagram, activated, and Solemn Judgment for 350 life points. Oh god, we have like maybe one monster remaining in our deck. I pray to god that we can draw it in this draw step, but unfortunately, what do we find but a Card of Demise with a dead hand? We draw into a Draco Apocalypse, and resign ourselves to our fate. We're going to be able to destroy the Shizuku, but we can't stop the Ray attacking us directly and the Diabolos triggering off of the Tribute. Good game. So we're back with the deck, and even though that last game gave me a little bit of an aneurysm, I do think this deck is particularly powerful. Amano-Iwato is an incredibly strong card, and probably enough to propel the deck to playability even though it doesn't really have a finisher. The addition of Dynamite Knight is a huge boon for the deck, allowing it to consistently find True King's Return and use some of the recursion that it's been lacking in recent builds. Certainly, cards like the Monarch's Erupt aren't particularly good in specific matchups, Brandish being the most popular, but these spots are flexible. As necessary, these can come out for anti-spell fragrance and the like as different decks become meta-dominant. All in all, I think this strategy is going to be particularly powerful in the upcoming format, and I don't think anyone should count True Draco out anytime in the near future. So that's that. If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/monobluetron every Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. It's a blast. Stop on by. Tonight, Sonic 21 Blast beat me about 9-0 with Shinobirds while I was on this list. If you have an idea for a certain deck or archetype you want me to take a look at in a future episode of this show, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you Wednesday.